Welcome to Grown Up. I'm Avery Moorcloss, and today I have a great guest for you. It helps that she's an old friend from journalism school, but she's also my most badass journalist buddy, out there holding politicians to account and making her mark on Canada's Parliament Hill. Crazy talented Globe and Mail parliamentary reporter, Kristy Kirkup. So, what's it like traveling across the world on the Prime Minister's plane? Let's ask the expert.
I remember growing up, all I wanted was to be a grown up. Now I'm grown up. Now I'm grown up.
From the very first day I met Kristy Kirkup, I knew she was going to be a killer journalist. In something as high pressure as journalism school, you can tell. It's pretty easy to see which classmates are going to win the awards, chase down the big stories, and get their byline on the front page. In investigative reporting class, when I was nervously trying to book a local candidate for city council, Kristy was already out interviewing a cabinet minister. She's just the kind of person who questions everything and then goes out and finds the answer and doesn't stop until she's at the finish line. For that reason and more, she is a fantastic reporter. Now, I am going to do something that Kristy will capital letters hate, which, I'm not going to lie, makes me want to do it even more. I am going to gloat over her and list some of her amazing achievements. Kristy is one of the most humble people I know, which means she deserves to be celebrated and at the same time, completely embarrassed by how proud of her I am. Kristy Kirkup has worked for almost all of Canada's large media companies over the past 10 years. From local CTV News in Ottawa to CBC News, Sun News, and the Canadian Press, Kristy's work has helped to explain the intricacies of Canada's political landscape to viewers and readers all across the country and beyond. Kristy has followed 2 prime ministers across the country, covered many elections, and was part of a team of Canadian press reporters that won a Canadian Journalism Foundation Jackman Award for Excellence in Journalism and were nominated for a National Newspaper Award for a series they did about sexual trauma in Indigenous communities. By the way, if I didn't make those 2 awards sound like big deals, they are big, big deals. Most recently, she's landed at the Globe and Mail as their parliamentary reporter. Watch for that front page byline, folks. And because she's the pro, meet my favorite political reporter.
My name is Kristy Kirkup, and I'm a political reporter. Part of my job involves finding out what's going on Parliament Hill, and it's usually pretty busy.
The Canadian government made the decision today to suspend diplomatic operations.
And often tracking down different politicians.
Newly minted NDP leader was going toe-to-toe with Stephen Harper for the very first time.
But it's also about trying to explain kind of why political stories matter.
Kate Hart and her 4-month-old feline just wrapped up a road trip from Ottawa to Ogdensburg, New York. Hart went south of the border to get Mr. Jay Gatsby vaccinated and to save money.
Trying to also think about people outside of the Ottawa bubble and always try and think about why is this an issue that people should care about, and how can I communicate what's happening on Parliament Hill and make sense of it in a way that resonates with everyday people. When I was younger, I just always really, really wanted to tell people stories. And it was something that I knew that I wanted to do from the time that I was a kid. My brother got a karaoke machine for Christmas, and the karaoke machine became a tool that was used a lot. I was the interviewer, and usually my brother was the interview subject, and I would essentially create talk shows on this karaoke machine. And I would always dream about kind of having my own show. Again, right now I'm covering politics, but what I love about just the work that I do is talking to people. And so I do get paid to talk for a living, which is fun.
And now, what I call a 30-second history of the job, a segment that not only takes me much more than 30 seconds, but also one that I wish Kristy could have written for me this time. Because I am willing to bet good money that during our first year Intro to Journalism class, she was listening and I was not. Journalism is one of those professions that spans history. Transmitting the news really just began with word of mouth. Far from the days of the 24-hour news cycle or live tweeting newsworthy events on Twitter, word of mouth news took days, weeks, months, and even years to disseminate. A note to say, because Kristy is primarily a print reporter at this moment, I'm going to focus my attention there. Notably, the Roman Empire of Julius Caesar began recording and distributing a daily record of political news and social events that continued until the empire collapsed. And here we're talking in the BC years, when they counted backwards. Now, let's jump ahead. 1450, Johannes Gutenberg invents the printing press. This gives rise not only to the wide dissemination of the Bible, but in England and Europe, printed news books or pamphlets on single topical events like battles, disasters, and public celebrations. In fact, the very first known example of a recorded eyewitness account is on the English victory over the Scots at the Battle of Flodden in 1513. Did I pronounce that right? YouTube says
Flodden.
Yes. I think it's interesting to note here that Gutenberg's invention wasn't just a device. It was a jumping off point for the popularization of the freedom of information exchange. From there, the history of journalism takes a long road through government censorship, the creation of libel laws, and of course, propaganda. Newspapers arrive in Europe in the 17th century. By 1665, England sees its first newspaper, the Oxford Gazette, and in Canada, we see the first newspapers pop up in Nova Scotia and Quebec in the early 1750s. But I will say they are largely instruments of colonial governments written by government officials. By the 1800s, we start to see independent newspapers as printing becomes less expensive, literacy rates increase, and the appetite for news amps up. The Globe and Mail, where Kristy works, was founded in 1936 when George McCulloch combined two influential Canadian dailies, The Globe and The Mail and Empire. Listen, I just skipped a lot, but let's just assume that the road from the first independent reporters to today's Twitter-dependent journalists is filled with ups and downs. Let's focus on one of those ups, the launch and growth of one of my favorite reporters, my friend Kristy Kirkup. A note about audio here, we refer to it later, but we did record this outside in Gatineau, Quebec this past summer. And this podcast maker learned a valuable lesson about placing microphones on patio tables. So sorry for the bumps and brushes. Well, enjoy. Kristy, lovely old friend Kristy, thank you for agreeing to let me shove a microphone in your face to be on Grown Up.
Well, the tables are turned in this scenario, so I figure I have to play ball.
And do you feel awkward yet?
A little bit, yeah.
Is it bizarre for someone to start asking you questions when you're not prepared for it?
Definitely. I think that as a journalist, one of the things perhaps that I thrive on is the element of control, because I'm in control of the questions. I know where the story is going. And when the microphone is pointing in the other direction, that is a feeling that I'm not used to. It's like, okay, what is she going to ask me? What am I going to say? Am I going to sound like I make any sense?
Well, I feel like anyone who works in broadcasting doesn't like the sound of their voice, but they do it regardless. So just don't listen to this episode.
All right.
Any tips for me on how to get the right scoop from you?
I have no tips. Oh. Just be yourself.
Flying free. Okay. So you start as a kid with a microphone from a karaoke machine, pretending to make, or I guess making actual radio shows. Doesn't necessarily mean they have real guests, but how do you go from that to kind of verbalizing this idea that like, hey, I want to be a reporter or a journalist or working in broadcasting?
I think it all kind of came together for me when I was in high school, and at the time I was going to a theater school, and I was kind of talking to some of my friends, and I just was really for example, even in our theater program, we would have an assignment where we would go and, watch a play, and it was always, we'd have to come up with reports after, and it was always, I enjoyed theater and I loved theater, but I liked going to the show and then writing about going to the show more than anything else, and it was always the writing piece, the storytelling piece that really interested me. And so that's when I just kind of thought about, okay, maybe this is something I could do. And my mom had always told me I should find a job where I could get paid to talk. And journalism felt like a natural fit for that, talking to people. And then again, being able to take that content and, listen back to it and create something.
It's so interesting because I feel like I've known you for 14 years.
Really, that long?
Yeah, because first year university.
I'm not as young as 14. I used to be.
So you're a grown-up.
Am I a grown-up?
No,
this is terrifying.
I
if I'm a grown-up, someone please push the pause button. This is the quintessential moment in your life where
you're like, uh-oh, now I'm a grown-up. Because I went to theater school too, and I hated acting. I loved being there. I hated acting, but I loved writing plays. And that was part of my, I think I'd already decided, I want to be a journalist, but that was part of it. I was like, I'm always somehow drawn back to the writing, which is interesting. And which is interesting for you because you were in broadcasting and now you're kind of back to print medium a little bit, right?
Yeah. For me, I kind of told myself, especially given the changing landscape of journalism, I always told myself that it was important to kind of stick your finger in every pot. And the writing piece, I think, is a central thread, no matter if you're in broadcasting or in print. And it's a different kind of writing. I always talk about it kind of putting your brain almost on different railroad tracks, broadcast versus print. But I wanted to be able to do the job that I'm doing now because it was an amazing opportunity to cover politics full time. And, I think that I'm constantly working on being a better writer, a better reporter, a better interviewer. I hope that I never lose that feeling of, wanting to be better. Because I think that no matter what you do, hopefully in the morning you get up and you think, okay, how can I be better at what I'm doing? And in journalism, I think you can always work on. Journalism can take different shapes, but how can you work on becoming a better writer, a better interviewer? I think for me, my natural inclination is I really enjoy interviews, and I really enjoy gathering content. And then one of the areas that I've kind of had to work on or focus on, I guess would be a more accurate term, would be after I do the interviews. What's the writing experience like? Yeah, and how can I go back and I think something that weighs on my mind is how can I make sure that the person, that I've just interviewed, especially if they're talking about really sensitive issues, how can I make sure that they're seen in what I'm about to produce? And trust is something that matters to me. That's the type of thing that keeps me up at night is if people are trusting you with something so intimately important to them and it's being put out to a large audience or readership, how can I make sure that people still see themselves and feel like they are accurately represented?
Well, and if you do any kind of work like that, I feel like there is a lot of pressure where you can do an interview with someone that lasts 35 minutes and you're going to use 45 seconds of something they said. The difference between good journalism and bad journalism is, are you able to put that into context so that 35 seconds accurately represents what they said in 35 minutes? I mean, when I was a reporter, that was big pressure to make
stressful
because there's so many different facets to especially things that are really sensitive, right? How do you deal with that when you're dealing with something so sensitive to make sure that, one, you're doing a service to the public, but also that you really are representing what someone's saying properly and not taking it out of context?
Yeah, I think it's something that weighs on me a lot, to be honest with you. I think that trust is not something that comes easy, nor should it. I think the fact that, if it does worry you, that's a good place to start.
That's true. I'm going to say for audio's sake, for anyone who's listening, we are sitting on a patio in Gatineau, Quebec. So you might hear like a mosquito buzz by.
I think there's some howling in
or
the
like
background.
A dog
Should we be
in the background? Or at some
concerned?
point, actually, in one of part of this interview, the hot tub started to heat itself. So it's a real rough life for listeners who are interested in why it sounds like we're in the forest. It's because we're in the forest.
We are.
With a hot tub. Oh, I like it. I think it adds charm. It's fine. Okay, so you go from high school, you get into one of the best journalism schools in the country. What's that like for you? I mean, I was there, but I would love to know from kind of like your perspective.
What was
those
it like to
4
get
years.
in? Oh.
No, just let's skip right into like being a journalism student. Would you say what it is blah, nah, nah, nah. I used to do this for a living. Would you say it's what you had expected it would be when as a kid you were making your radio shows and saying you wanted to be a journalist? Did it play out the way you thought it would?
No, but I think what I would say is that I found that journalism education, I found the program itself, well, they were some very it was a very challenging time, just because I think that the program was designed, again, to kind of set you up to be able to be a broadcaster or a print writer. And at the time, in my mind, I kind of had an idea of like, okay, well, I want to be a broadcaster and this is what I want to do. And so once I was able to get to that part of the program, that's when I felt like I started to thrive more. But it's funny because when I was when we were studying print, there were certain things that people were really trying to instill in me at that time, and I didn't understand why they mattered. Mm-hmm. And now I thank the program very much for being able to transition from, different broadcast jobs to working in print. And quite frankly, I think that we're in the midst of, again, seeing the media landscape, especially as it converges online. People are writing web stories, they're doing broadcast work, we're all wearing different hats. And so I think the program really set, me up for being able to be flexible and transition to different platforms. But it was not something that necessarily came easy when I was really putting my head into it in school. But I'm really grateful because I think that people need to be able to wear different hats, not just in journalism, but just career-wise. We know that likely people will change careers many different times, and being flexible was something that was really kind of instilled in us in the program. So I'm thankful
it's interesting
for that.
Just kind of talking to people who are running journalism schools now. I have a few kind of friends in that business in university and college. It's definitely shifting this idea that, when we went to journalism school, it was like you go to journalism school to be a journalist. And if you want to be in communications, do mass comm. And now it's funny, I'm seeing this shift in talking to people who are training people in journalism, this idea that like we're teaching a skill that can be used for a bunch of different things, and we need to accept that because there aren't that many journalism jobs, like popping up here and there. If anything, print, has its ups and downs, but it's a pretty shaky industry sometimes. And so it's interesting to see the kind of shift in journalism schools now is like, we're training people for social media, we're training people for doing communications work, corporate communications, writing, freelance writing. I don't know, did you feel like we had that? I really think like not having worked outside of journalism that everything we did prepare us, but there was always this kind of sense of like, you're here to be a journalist. This is how you be a journalist. And now I feel like journalism is shifting into this territory where you have to kind of be a bunch of different things, and journalism schools are trying to follow that. It's not a question, but it's just kind of an interesting, something that recently I've come upon, which I thought was kind of interesting for the people who are in journalism now, is that they're not actually necessarily in journalism to be journalists, which is kind of an interesting shift to me. But
yeah, I mean, again, I think it goes back to that central thread for me where I think that writing at its core, that's what I really wanted to do. And I think that no matter, I've worked for 4 different media companies and I've done, very different jobs in the industry itself, but the common thread is the writing piece and as well interviewing. But I think that becoming a good communicator and becoming an effective writer and being able to cut through information quickly is a real skill. It's a real professional skill. And
that's my baby knocking on a patio door. Mom life. I like it. And there's dads going to give it. Okay, let's talk about the cool factor of your job, because I think
is there a cool factor?
Okay, so here's the thing about journalists that they don't understand. Everyone else thinks it's really cool, and journalists are like, it's just kind of normal. I found when I was a reporter, someone would say, what are you? And I'd say, oh, I'm a radio reporter. And they say, whoa, that's so cool. And I'd say the same thing, is it? But what would you say is the coolest part of what you do?
I think the opportunity to be able, just as a political reporter, to be able to hear from people who are in positions of power, that is always, I think that it's never lost on me that those are rare opportunities, and to be able to put questions to people in positions of authority, whether it was putting a question to Stephen Harper or putting a question to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, being able to ask a prime minister a question, that just to be able, there are many countries, where journalism or journalists come under attack. Journalism as well itself comes under attack. So that is, it's never lost on me that is, that's something important and critical that we do. I like to be able to talk to people from just different walks of life, and that's what journalism has done for me, where I've kind of met and talked to people that are going through sometimes the most horrific circumstances, and yet they are placing their trust in you to tell their story, and there's travel involved, which is fun. Beyond just being a political reporter, occasionally we get to do like travel pieces where I work, and, being able to just, again, be a writer and talk about, cool things to do in the area. Sometimes it's just being able to use your brain in different ways. But
Can you, quick, short list, tell me the places you've been to report traveling?
I've been to, covering election campaigns, I've been to lots of different places throughout Canada, like, small town Ontario to Vancouver to the far north. I've gone to Iqaluit a few times. And then internationally, I've gone to Jerusalem in 48 hours and back. I recently went to Argentina for the G20, different events that are happening wherever the Prime Minister goes. One of the reporters in my newsroom will go. So that has led me on some interesting experiences. And for some reason, I've often ended up on the trips where you go to South America. I've been to South America, I think, 3 times. A couple of times with Stephen Harper, and then once with...
So I think once with Trudeau. Sorry, I'm cutting you off. But I think what people don't realize is that you actually travel often on the Prime Minister's plane when you go to those faraway places,
yes.
Correct? What is that like?
You're at the back of the plane, and it's not like you're sitting up near the Prime Minister. It's, there's a bunch of staff between the journalists at the back of the plane and then, officials and people who are sitting at the front of the plane closer to where the Prime Minister is. So, but there's a lot of security, obviously. It's kind of one of those situations where, you go from flying with the Prime Minister who, there's just certain things that in terms of like being able to leave at a certain time, like it's not like a commercial flight that, when they want and need to leave, if you're on that plane, they're in full control of that plane versus
like a paying customer who they might wait.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Because it's on the Prime Minister's timeline.
Yes.
Right. So does the Prime Minister know your name? Like if you're Scrum,
I'm not sure.
How does that all work? Like for someone who's never been in something like that before, like a press conference or something where the Prime Minister is speaking, how do you go about asking questions and how does that work?
So, yeah, if you were in a press conference situation, you would, step up to the microphone and say your name. So I would say, Kristy Kirkup, and then go on to say my question. So, I've asked the Prime Minister a question quite a few times, but again, I'm not going to sound like a a jerk to insinuate anything. But
no,
yes.
this is your job and it's what you do every day. And I think I just want people to have like a kind of insider view. Okay, you've talked about kind of like the cool factor. What's a really bad day in journalism look like?
Well, a bad day in journalism. First of all, I would say that one of the things that's the most difficult, like on a daily basis, is of course like feeling the deadline pressure. Especially, you want to be able to, go and chase a story and find out all the facts and all you need to know. But there's a certain limitation, which is, I need to be able to produce this story by the end of the day. So, I would say the harder days are when, really unpredictable things happen and you're, trying to get to the bottom of a story and you're encountering a lot of roadblocks. Or the worst is like when you can't get a hold of anyone. And I would say the kiss of death in journalism, or someone told me this years ago, like the kiss of death in journalism is just to say, oh, well, no one called me back. So like, that's that. Like,
right.
You have to keep calling. And so I would say that
the deadline comes and something has to get filed.
Yes, it's not like I can have the luxury of writer's block. Like
or
that's
saying
not.
like, oh, well, no one called me back today, so sorry, guys.
I mean, there are times where stories don't come together, and it's not like you're going to produce something that's not, factual or anything like that. It's just a matter of, okay, well, some days are difficult in terms of getting people, if it's a holiday, getting people on the line and tracking them down at a particular time and getting them to respond to, there might be a story that you're just trying to get them to react to, like an event that's happened, and to be able to connect with them. So I don't know if this is really answering your question, but I think that the worst case scenario also involves, there can be some really, really serious stuff that you have to cover, that I've covered in my career. And on top of the deadline pressure, the emotional pressure of trying to be able to contact, family members after people have died. Those are some of the harder ones for sure.
For sure. Well, I asked the question because I think people have, especially for something like a Parliament Hill reporter, like really glamorous ideas of what that looks like. And I want people to know that it's not always glamour. It's like...
It's like 99% not glamour.
Yeah, exactly.
In fact, I would say, to answer your original question about what do you do every day? I'm pretty much trying to hunt down information, usually hunt down people to talk about it. I rarely take a lunch break, if I ever take a lunch break, because I'm constantly feeling this deadline pressure. I feel like I'm cramming for an exam that I have to write at the end of every single day. Like I'm thrown into situations or, thrown onto stories. And, I'm lucky in that I do have, we have a beat system and I can, dig in deeper on my beat. But there are also days when something big is happening and you have to learn about it and then write about it within a very short period of time.
It's funny, when I was in reporting, I would always say, people say, oh, you know so many things. And I'd say, yeah, I know a lot about everything, but I don't know everything about one thing. Like you end up kind of like a little bit of an expert in all sorts of different things. And it's not, it makes for you can come up with interesting dinner party conversation, but at some point you have to ask yourself, where is all that information filed away? Right? You've got a brain full of facts there, miss. Yeah,
well, I hope so. I think sometimes, I don't know, you go from you're just, again, you're wearing different hats and covering so many different things that sometimes it all feels like a blur. I think that as you ask me this question, I'm kind of in that state. Yeah, a little bit.
Trying to pull the file folder and be like, where is all that stuff?
That is actually exactly the picture I had in my mind, which was what file folder is this story in? Okay, yes, I do. And so, again, I think that if you're able, I'm lucky that I get to cover some of the same issues on a regular basis and develop contacts, and that's a big part of what I do.
Build relationships.
But and build those relationships for sure. But yeah, I sometimes feel like I'm a master of none. Not a grown-up, not a master of anything. Just...
I think you're a lovely grown-up.
Kristy Kirkup, looking for answers every day, every single day.
That's funny. Okay, I have 2 big questions for you left. One is, I'm sure that all the time you get that email from a friend saying, oh, my son or daughter wants to go into journalism. I still get that, and I'm not actively a reporter. But regardless, if you were in front of a room, and I'm sure this has probably happened to you at some point, of people who are maybe looking at journalism or maybe just looking at anything that they want to do that they're passionate about, what's your like best nugget of advice for those people?
I feel like for me, becoming a journalist was almost like a light switch that I couldn't switch off. After I studied journalism at Carleton, I ended up doing an education degree. And at that time, the program was only a year. And when I was studying to become a teacher, and I think that there are common threads between journalism and teaching, because fundamentally you're taking ideas and explaining them in a way that people can understand, and also hopefully in an engaging way. And I felt like the whole time I was in Teachers College, I kept feeling like, oh, well, you know, I was thinking about education stories as opposed to like how I could become a better, you know, a better teacher. And that was the moment I knew that this was just like something that was so deeply baked into me that I felt like I needed to stay true to that. And I knew it was going to be hard. And you know, and there's ups and downs in everyone's career. And now that I'm 10 years in, I'm not going to sugarcoat it and say I love, you know, there was a job that I had for a time where I had to get up at 3 a.m. and I went into work at 4 a.m. on Saturdays and Sundays because it was an opportunity. It was, you know, a shoe in the door. Is that a saying? Anyway,
a foot in the
door.
A foot in the door.
See, shouldn't write for a living.
All
just
about
kidding.
The word.
Needless to say, I was going in because I, you know, was obviously really passionate about wanting to to tell stories, to be a reporter, but it didn't come without a cost.
Yeah.
But I have kind of, I guess, to answer your question, I've always told myself that, you know, I really need to stay true to myself about what I want to do and what makes, you know, to be passionate about something. So I think no matter what you want to do, and it's especially, again, in a changing media landscape, or again, we all will probably wear different hats and work for many different places, because that's just statistically how things are at this particular time. But I think people should just think about, like, what is the thing about me that makes me me? So again, I talk a lot, like talk nonstop. What is the thing that makes me me, and how can I parlay that into a career? Or again, lots of people will also, you know, are really passionate and they have hobbies as well. I don't think I have hobbies, which is probably a problem, but that's a whole other conversation, because journalism has been an all-consuming, like,
it's a
passion
career and
for
a
me.
hobby. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's like, I should probably, you know, do some stuff for myself too. But main point being, people should just think about, like, what is it about me? Who am I? And what just, like, comes naturally. And, like, going back to that light switch analogy, what is the thing that you just can't turn off, or that path you just somehow keep being drawn back to because of who you are? And for me, those are skills that could be used in many different ways. And I think that that's what's amazing about something like journalism. As a writer, being able to foster those skills, it can unlock a number of opportunities. But like, what's the spark? I always think about a high school teacher I had, and he taught math, but he would talk about, like, he would say to the students in the room, like, wake up, where is the fire in your belly, and what is it, and just, like, do something with that. So I'm not saying that every single day you're going to be passionate about your job, but I think that would be my advice, is, like, what is the thing that you really love to do?
Which leads perfectly into my last question, which I left to last because I kind of love your answer to it because it's similar to mine, which is, and you know, I stand firmly on my soapbox that we need to stop asking kids, oh, what do you want to be when you grow up? And we need to start asking them to be mindful about what's the contribution you want to make, because that contribution can play itself out in a number of different ways, whereas you can pigeonhole yourself into, you know, this is the job I have to do because I always said I'd do it. So looking at what, like, you know, what's the fire in your belly? What's the contribution that you wake up and think, this is what I'm adding. This is what I'm contributing. What keeps you going? How would you put that into words, the contribution you're hoping to make?
Oh my gosh, some days I feel like the thing that keeps me going are like sugary snacks in the newsroom, which is, again, something that should not be a thing.
The old-timey journalist who's like,
keeps...
coffee and cigarettes.
Well, there's definitely a lot of coffee.
Yeah.
I think that the thing that keeps me going is that I feel like stories, I know that I'm a bit bright-eyed here as I'm like, oh, journalism can make a difference. Like, it actually can. And I'm not trying to pump my own tires in saying this, but I think that someone also said to me, like, if you're a musician, you're not always going to hit the right notes. But, like, when you do and you hit the right note and it's, like, really great, you're left with this feeling of, like, wow, like, that was amazing. Like, I hit the note. And so I know that, like, as a daily news reporter, I'm not always going to hit it out of the park. Some days I'm going to be running around and people aren't answering their phone. Maybe it goes back to your point about, here's what a bad day looks like. Not every day is going to be a good day in any job you do.
For sure.
But on the days that I am able to tell a story, or the story for me in the political context, it gets raised in the House of Commons, or there's political change that comes about as a result of your work, or, a recent example for me was I did a series of stories about Indigenous women who were alleging that they had been coerced into having their tubes tied when they were going in to give birth. And when I did a series of these stories, it, at least brought about an additional level of awareness about the fact that there were ongoing allegations of this happening. And so as a reporter, then after my story came out, other news outlets like CBC, people were interviewing people about this and talking to people about this. So again, has the issue, the alleged issue stopped? People say no. For me, obviously that weighs on my mind because people are still saying they're going through this or have been through this. But I think that being able to raise awareness about it and to be able to bring these stories out of the shadows, that is what drives me. That is what gets me up every day. And I'm like, this is what I'm meant to do. For better or for worse, this is what I'm meant to do. I'm meant to talk to people. I care deeply about earning their trust. And I have a platform to be able to tell their story on a national level. And, whether I'm talking into a microphone or writing a story, people are talking and thinking about these issues because they are reading about it. And so I think my contribution is hopefully to shine a light in dark places and bring a heightened level of awareness and hopefully more action on issues that for far too long have not been talked about or written about or thought about. And so, maybe I'm on my soapbox now too, but that's what motivates me. Sometimes being a reporter is super exhausting. It's a grind. Producing stories every day is a grind, and not every day is glamorous. Most days aren't glamorous. Most days I pine for being able to have like a coffee quietly by myself for 5 minutes and like collect my thoughts, because it feels like a rat race. But some days when I can hit the high notes, then I think, yep, there it is. That's why I do what I do. And I'm not under some false expectation that I'm going to be able to do that every day. Some days, like everybody else, I have crappy days at work, and then I get up and I think, how's today going to be different? And like, what's a story that I really, really want to tell, or what needs to be told? And how can people trust me to tell those really sensitive stories? And if I don't tell them, like, again, maybe this is totally idealistic, but if there isn't a reporter to call to shine a light in those dark places, then what happens? Where do those people go? Maybe they, again, go on social media and tell their own story. I don't know. But as a storyteller, how can we lift up these voices and tell people about really important issues, or ask, questions to government officials that they normally wouldn't be asked, to hopefully get to the bottom of important situations that are happening.
Well, I think you're a beautiful storyteller.
Thank you.
And I'm so glad you do what you do, because it's really hard. And kudos to you for
for sticking to it and for asking the questions that people don't want to answer because somebody has to.
Thank you.
And thank you for telling your story on Grown Up and doing this while we're at this lovely cottage.
You know what? It is. It's nice to be able to talk about why I'm passionate about what I do, because all your questions are a reminder to me about why are you doing this in the first place? Because no matter what you're doing, I think sometimes we should all ask ourselves that question. Why am I doing what I'm doing? Pull yourself back maybe to that center of like, what is it that I'm passionate about? Where's the fire in my belly? So being on the end of your microphone makes me feel like I have a fire in my belly today.
Oh, good. on a Saturday when hopefully you don't have to go report something. Well, thank you. I appreciate you doing this.
Thank you.
Grown Up is created, recorded, and edited by me, Avery Moore-Klaus, and my company, Folktale Studio. Portions of this episode were recorded at one of my happy places, the Switch Podcast Studio at Wilfrid Laurier University in downtown Brantford, Ontario. To keep up to date on what's coming next, follow us on Instagram or Twitter at GrownUpPod. Over on our social channels, we'd love to hear your interview suggestions. We like to interview regular people who do interesting work, so drop us a name or a profession or, just a note about something. Also, I would like to say if you got all the way to the end of this podcast and didn't subscribe, you should probably do that now. So thanks. And that's it. Thanks for listening.